welcome. Happy New Year. Welcome to season 8 of Conversations in Education. I hope everyone had a happy Christmas holiday, a happy New Year, and all of those things. I want to welcome back all of the schools and all of the students who are coming back from winter break. I hope everyone had fun. I hope everyone relaxed their mind and got ready for the second half of the school year. And yeah, y'all ready to go. I need some schools and teachers to send me some scholars of the week that I can help promote and promote some of our youth out there for doing positive things in school and in their community. With that being said, the views and opinions of Conversation in Education are those of the show host and the guest, and not of WCEG Network. I just want to make sure that it's clear. Today we're going to be jumping into a bit of a heavy subject, and I'll get to that in a minute. I have one more announcement. I was waiting on this address. The Kaumba Storytellers of Georgia, they are going to be having a historical Black portraits program February the 19th, and it is going to be at the Southwest Arts Center. February 19th, I believe the time is 3 p.m. I will verify that, but you can go to the website, cohost.org, to get more information. But it's going to be February 19th, Southwest Arts Center, 915 New Hope Road, the Black Box Theater, Atlanta, Georgia, 30331. February 19th, 2023, 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. It's a very, very interesting program. It's a Black history program, and we're going to have some really good storytellers. We're going to have a little bit of spoken word there from yours truly. So if you can come out and support, it would be greatly, greatly, greatly appreciated. Again, that is the Kaumba Storytellers of Georgia. The website is coumbastorytellers.org. It's our historical Black portraits program, February 19th, Southwest Arts Center, 3 to 5 p.m. If you can make it out, please make it out and support. It will be a grand old time. Okay, and last but not least, if you are in the Fort Lauderdale area, Mr. Vincent Cheeks, yours truly, hosts a karaoke night on Friday nights, 4322 North State Road 7. Come on out, get you some stage therapy, relax, relate, release, and just let go of any stress, pressures, or what have you may be going on through the week. It's 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. Again, that's in Fort Lauderdale, Karaoke Fridays, 4322 North State Road 7, Lake Seafood Restaurant. Lake Seafood Restaurant. And I'm sorry, Petty, my producer always has to tell me to smile. And it's not that I don't like smiling, because I have a very gorgeous smile. But this topic today is a little heavy, and I've been kind of dreading getting into it today. But for me, it's a very important topic. It's a very personal topic. And with that, I'm going to smile and I'm going to get right into it. But before I get into it, I have to make this disclaimer. Some of the things we're going to talk about is of a sensitive nature. It's pertaining, we're doing the show today about the Balenciaga child sexual exploitation scandal that happened back in November and the early part of December. And so it's a very heavy topic in general. So if you are easily triggered, if you have some history with child sexual abuse, you may want to have second thoughts about listening in on this show. If you have small ears around, it's gonna be heavy, but it's still gonna be family oriented. We're gonna give out information that can help victims. Also, I don't want to say victims. I'm sorry, survivors. They're called survivors. So, and also there's some of the things I'm gonna discuss that if you choose to go down this rabbit hole, I'm not gonna go too deep down it. But if you choose to go down the rabbit hole, there's a lot of pedophilia type images and things There's demonic images, there's occult images and things of that nature. So it's pretty deep and it's pretty serious. And I just wanted to make sure that if you're gonna go looking into this stuff, you can't. It's gonna be a heartstring puller. Numbers. Thank you for that. Phone numbers. The National Sexual Assault Hotline, 1-800-656-HOPE or 1-800-656-4675. 1-800-656-4673. 1-800-656-4673. That's the National Sexual Assault Hotline. Suicide hotline, 1-800-273-TALK. 1-800-273-TALK, which is 1-800-273-8255. Again, these are serious, heavy topics. And before we even get started, I want to dedicate this show to this young lady right here. She goes by the name of Shania Davis. This story was one of the first times I feel like God told me to speak out against child sexual abuse. Because it was one of the first stories I heard after I learned some things about my own history. And so Shania Davis was a 5-year-old little girl. Her mom was a drug addict. And in order to pay off a $200 drug debt, her mother sold Shania to the drug dealer to pay off this $200 debt. And when I saw this story on the news, they showed the last images of Shania alive. And the guy, the drug dealer, when he took her to the hotel, they had him on camera and he had Shania over his shoulder and he was carrying her like, like she was his daughter. And he's carrying her down the hall and she's laying on his shoulder and she's sucking on her 2 middle fingers. And if you didn't know what the situation was, it looked like a loving father carrying his daughter to bed, but that's not what it was. And the last image they showed of him on camera was him unlocking the hotel room door and walking into the hotel room with this little girl on his shoulders. And as I'm watching this story, like as soon as the door closed behind them, I just started bawling. Like I just started crying uncontrollably. And I really didn't understand why at the time. Needless to say, he assaulted her, he killed her, and 6 days later, they found her body in the woods. And I remember I cried about this situation for a couple of days, and I really didn't understand why, because I didn't know this girl, but it was just a situation in and of itself. And then when the mother got arrested and she went to court before the judge to explain herself, she tells the judge that the drug dealer was only supposed to have sex with her and not kill her. Like that's somehow supposed to make things better. And so I was just very disturbed by this story. Anyway, after that, I'm what some people call an empath. I mean, I feel things very deeply. And so because I was so affected by this story, I guess the only way to describe it is I intentionally forgot her name, because if I ever met somebody with that same name, I would associate it with this girl in this story. And so I did that. And so for me, I even had to type in mother sold daughter for $200 drug debt to even remember what her name was to find this picture that I just showed you of her. So anyway, so I'm dedicating the show to Shania Davis. We're going to dive into this Balenciaga thing and see what we can do to better protect our children. Okay. And I apologize for the light. I brought a new ring light, and apparently it times out every however long this thing keeps going out. So I apologize. Okay, so the Balenciaga child sex exploitation scandal. On November 16th, Balenciaga released its campaign, its holiday campaign, which was called Toy Stories. And in some of the pictures, children were posed with teddy bears, and the teddy bears were dressed in BDSM gear or BDSM clothing. I'm sorry. I done went all into the thing and I done totally forgot my guess. I'm sorry, Mr. Norman Carter.
It's that deep.
It is because this story has really
deep.
It's really shaken me to my core, to be perfectly honest. But let me pause, let me go back, and let me introduce my guest. His name is Mr. Norman A. Carter. He is the host of Issues and Answers, and it comes on what time, sir?
2 Mondays a month, from 4 p.m. until 5 p.m. The second and fourth Monday of each month.
Second and fourth Monday of each month. Okay. Mm-hmm. And he is also the author of The Long Blue Walk, which is in autobiography. Nope, I'm gonna let you tell me about it, sir. Tell us a little bit about the book and where we can find it.
Yeah, The Long Blue Walk is an autobiography of my 25-year police career, and it's available on Amazon, any of your major book outlets, and it really is a story about not only about my career, but my battles with fighting corruption and abuse of authority throughout my career, and the retaliation that I suffered both during my career up to possibly 10 years after my career ended.
Okay.
So that's the Reader's Digest version, Cliff Notes version.
You had me exposing corruption. Okay.
Yes.
So yeah. I'm all for it, and I'm gonna have to check that out and give you my feedback on that, sir. So,
all right, please do.
But congrats on the book, and I hope it does really well.
Thank you.
Okay, now back to the controversy. One of the reasons I wanted to do this story is because when it first happened, there was a whole uproar about it. And since the second week of December, I haven't really heard much of anything about it. And so for me, I feel like these companies, these people that cause harm to children, especially if they have a lot of money, they feel like they can do these things and pull out these subliminal messages and get away with it. And that was one of my arguments for telling my producer I wanted to do the show. I'm tired of people getting away with this. I'm tired of people getting away with harming children. So I feel like this story should stay in the forefront, and all these stories should be in the forefront when it comes to protecting our children. So with that being said, on November 16th, Balenciaga released this campaign called Toy Stories. It was their holiday ad campaign. Some of the pics showed children posed with these teddy bears dressed in BDSM gear. BDSM stands for bondage, discipline, sadism, and masochism. Bondage is, their specific type of gear and clothing that you wear if you're going to participate in bondage type adult theme matters. And so these teddy bears were wearing harnesses, fishnet shirts, chokers around their neck, things that just weren't appropriate, I didn't think, to be shot with young children. So that became a whole thing and a whole issue. And then they had a second ad. And in the second ad, it showed a woman in an office setting sitting with a pile of papers and books around her at this desk. And in the pile of papers, there was a Supreme Court ruling related to child pornography. And we'll get into that a little bit further in the discussion. It was called Ashcroft versus the Free Speech Coalition. But it was basically a document pertaining to the certain things pertaining to child pornography. Does it infringe on people's right to free speech? And so this became a whole big thing. After it blew up on internet, you know, Balenciaga started feeling the heat. They feeling pressure from outside communities, from the people. So then they started issuing apologies on November 22nd. They issued an apology, and they said, for displaying unsettling documents, that's the child porn document. We apologize for displaying unsettling documents. And they threatened legal action to a third party who they said created the whole set and put all of these unapproved items in the ad campaign. And we'll talk about the unapproved items in a second here. Now, on November 28th, Balenciaga issued another apology on Instagram, and it was from their president, Mr. Cedric Charbit. He promised the company would learn from its mistakes. He also rescinded the decision to pursue legal actions against the third party, which was fraudulent anyway. And instead of pursuing legal action, they said they were going to set aside a significant fund to donate to organizations in the name of protecting children. To this date, I haven't seen, read, or found one article to where they have done that yet. On December 2nd, the creative director for the whole project and the whole ad campaign, his name is Dimna, he issued an apology saying it was inappropriate to have kids promote objects that had nothing to do with them. My mistake was making the wrong artistic choice of concept for the gifting campaign with the children. And so everybody's pointing fingers. They're all issuing these vague and not really meaningful apologies, if you ask me. And the people made an uproar. Like, there was anger. The first 2 to 3 weeks after this happened, people were angry. People were mad, and they had every right to be. Because the people were noticing there were a lot of symbolism and a lot of subtle signs in these pictures. Within the pictures of the children holding the bondage teddy bears, there were also other things in the pictures that were not child appropriate. For instance, and these are many of the things that people were talking about on the internet and a lot of articles that I read. And anything I mentioned here, you can go on the internet and find it and search it. But just be forewarned, it's a lot. So in one of the pictures with a little boy, they had pictures of a demon. Like, it looked like a little child drew a picture of a demon, and they stuck it up on the wall behind this little boy. In isolated incidences or incidences of these things just being by themselves, they might not mean a whole lot, but the collective symbolism and the things that they were trying to relay with these pictures and these items says a whole lot if you're really listening. Again, the bears were wearing bondage gear. The first picture I saw was of a little 5-year-old girl. She's holding a little teddy bear purse. And the teddy bear purse has on a fishnet top with a choker on around his neck. First thing I said when I saw it was, why is this little girl holding a bear with a fishnet stocking? Because that's, to me, I've always related fishnets to adult themed things. And that's where immediately where my mind went to. Also in the pictures, they have surrounded this little girl with wine glasses. I don't know what reason you could have for having wine glasses in the shot with a 5-year-old girl. But they were there. There were collars laid around on this set that people wear around their necks. They had a picture of a book by Michael Borman called Fire from the Sun. This is one of those demonic images books. The book contains themes of pedophilia, blood rituals, dark religiosity, occultism, racism, and cannibalism. And this was a book that was in the forefront of this picture of this lady sitting in the office. I found some of the images from this book, and the images are very, very disturbing. The first image I saw from the book was a picture of a toddler, maybe 3, 4, 5 years old. He's covered in blood and he's missing one of his arms. And he's standing there with a distressed look on his face. And he's looking at his arm laying on the ground. And it's just not it's not something you look at and it makes you feel good. I tell you that much. And apparently this book is filled with imagery like this. The bear that was wearing the fishnet also had the choker around his neck with a lock on the choker. In another picture in the same set, there's a grown man wearing an Adidas outfit with his face not shown, but he has a key around his finger that looks like it fits the choker that's around the teddy bear's neck. And so then my first question becomes, well, why would a grown man have a key to the choker around the teddy bear that the little girl is holding? That doesn't make sense to me. And there's nothing else in the shot that would require the key that this man is holding. Okay. And then there was this picture frame that had this man's name in it, John Philip Fisher. You can look all this stuff up. It's all over the internet. And John Philip Fisher was apparently this rich man who sexually assaulted his granddaughter from the age of 6 to the age of 12 or 14. Okay. So people are noticing all of these things within these pictures with these children, and people are all up in arms. People were burning Balenciaga bags and shoes and cutting up Balenciaga bags and shirts and stuff like that. And it became this whole thing while it was a big thing. Again, it is filtered out. And so when I really started researching all of this stuff, and I really went into the rabbit hole of what this was, the only other thing that I've seen that has shaken me to my core pertaining to children was when I was a teacher and I taught during the Atlanta public school cheating scandal. And I realized that they were miseducating children on a large scale. And not only did I realize that, that became the catalyst for everything I do today in being a voice for children and being a voice for the youth. And so when I saw this campaign, it shook me. And I really didn't know what to feel about it at first, but I knew that it was an epidemic that is destroying children, to be perfectly honest. That's the only way I can really put it, because this stuff is damaging and people act like these things are happening in a bubble or they're just isolated incidences, and they're not. They're becoming growing incidences that is affecting every age of child and every race of child and every socioeconomic status of child, not only in this country, but in the world. And so with that being said, I'm going to bring my guest, Mr. Carter, in. And my first question for you, sir, is what were your thoughts when you first began looking into this Balenciaga controversy?
Well, I think one thing that you just said is so relevant. This stuff is not happening in a bubble.
Right.
You know, in 2006, the New York Times reported that the exploitation of children on the internet was a $20 billion industry. That was in 2006. And that continues to expand both in the United States and abroad. And the one thing that how does this it gets so subtly into our consciousness, into our advertising, into our media.
Right.
And what do I mean by subtlety? Subtlety means giving you something gradually to the point that you accept it.
Yes.
If you remember, let's go back to 1996. A young lady, a child by the name of Joan Benet Ramsey.
Yes.
She was murdered. Prior to her murder, her parents paraded her around in fashion shows.
Yes.
And she was really dressed as an adult in a child's body.
Yes, sir.
Wearing the picture that we see most probably about her, wearing a red choker around her neck. You see, the stuff is not new. It's not new. It's not new. And when I talk about gradualism in advertising, it tends to lead to acceptance. And I'm old enough to remember when you couldn't say toilet on television. Going back to Jack Parr, which predates most of you. There was a time when there was no profanity allowed on TV programming. Now you can hear an assortment of profane words at any time on any day. And this is why child porn, it's related to this. It's a multi-billion-dollar business.
Yes.
And the sexual exploitation of minors is really more prevalent than what you're comfortable hearing. Now, before I get to that, I want to go back to something that you were talking about earlier, if you don't mind. During the waning months of my police career, we raided a drug house.
Okay.
In North Philadelphia. And of course, the house was terrible. It was absolutely terrible house. But what we found is a 5-year-old girl being used by the mother and father to pay off sex debts. There was an infant who was about maybe a year old. There was this 5-year-old girl, and then there was this little boy. The little boy looked like he was 5 years old. He was 11 years old. Hadn't been in school in probably 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
Basically, these kids were starved in order to continue with the drug habit. But we had this, and this goes on more than you folks are comfortable in accepting.
Right.
Where these babies are being used to pay off sex debts. And that gravitates into young children, young girls, and young boys being kidnapped and then being sexually exploited by pimps and other people, and being used by some of the most respectable, in quotes, adults in our society. So, as I say, it's subtle. It's sadly, it doesn't surprise me just because of the experiences that I have had. And I think that it takes a lot of courage for you to put on this type of programming because this is the type of thing that major media actually wants to suppress, because there's billions of dollars involved. Billions. And so that's why people like Balenciaga and several others are willing to take this risk to do things like this, because eventually, and just like you said earlier, people stop talking about it. People stop
Yes.
talking about it.
Yes.
It becomes accepted. And then that's the rabbit hole that society goes down.
Right.
Because we accept so much. So you're right on so many fronts.
So let me ask you this. So why do you think there isn't more outrage surrounding this? Because, you know, we can get mad. When I say we, society gets mad at little frivolous things, and they can be mad about it for a long time. But when it comes to something big like child sexual exploitation, there's a quick furor about it, and then it just fizzles out. So why do you think there's a more outrage around this? Because I was a little disappointed because all of this happened end of February, end of November, beginning of December. I went into one of the biggest malls in South Florida the week before Christmas, and I walk in and look up. There's a giant Balenciaga banner hanging from the rafters. So I'm like, and my first thing is, so we're not mad about this anymore. Like we're not mad about this no more.
Right, right. And it goes back to what I talk about, the subtle acceptance of a little thing. The example I use is, and I don't mean to be evangelistic, but the great tempter will tempt you with a feather. That feather turns into a leaf.
Yeah.
That leaf turns into a grape. Eventually, they grape ferments, and your brain is intoxicated into accepting whatever comes along after that. And so your reasoning is so polluted that things that you said earlier, oh, that is outrageous, I would never accept that. All of a sudden, it becomes acceptable because you accepted the little things. You know, and this is why I'll go back to my other statement I made. It was a big thing to say damn on television years ago.
Yeah.
It was a big, big thing.
Yeah.
And now you hear TV commercials with children saying frickin'. And we know what frickin' is a euphemism for.
Yeah.
Children.
Yeah.
Sitting around the table talking to their parents using that word. And and there's no outrage. Right. And words, the acceptance of words really determines our acceptance of other things, because that's putting the seed in your head.
Yes.
So this is how, you know, they say Satan is beguiling. He never hits you over the head with a hammer. He starts off with a feather.
Yeah.
Because you're looking for the hammer. But
you're right. Yeah.
But you know, you get something subtle as the advertising that Balenciaga put out with all the symbolism in the background.
Right.
Hoping, you know, consciously you're not accepting it, but you're accepting it subconsciously. And that's where they're trying to get to. Yeah. That's how you get to people.
Right. And that's the purpose of symbolism. You're right.
Correct.
You're absolutely correct.
Correct.
So I mentioned the people burning Balenciaga and all of that stuff. I don't know if you saw some of those videos in your research, but they were burning the shoes, cutting up. Now, mind you, I didn't know most of this stuff runs from $1,000 to $3,000 for a pair of shoes. Right. Okay, so I don't know nobody that's buying Balenciaga. That's not my tax rate. Okay, yeah. But in regards to that, is it the people's responsibility to punish the company or the government? And by that,
I think you're frozen, or either I'm frozen.
He's frozen. Can you pick up, Mr. Norman?
Sure. The one thing that I would say is that you don't need the government intervention if people have the wherewithal to boycott products. if they want to walk, but people want to walk around in products that say Balenciaga and Gucci and Air Jordan and Tommy Hilfiger. That is why it is so unusual for you, Mr. Cheeks, to have the courage to put on a program dealing with this topic. Decent people do not want to hear this. And I'm putting decent in quotes. This program is upsetting to what has become a gradual norm. Now, parents today, and this is why I say we have to look at ourselves, parents will continue to give toddlers permanent hairdos, dress them in heels when they are far too young, and stick metal into their ears and nose, or tattoo their preteen children. This is acceptance of things that children should not be exposed to. I know the thing about putting metal in kids' ears has been something I've been talking about ever since I had children. But it's just unsettling the way that we are programmed into accepting behavior that should be unacceptable. And mainstream media is quiet on the issue, all because of money. Money, money, money. Can you hear the OJ singing in the background? For the love of money. Billions of dollars in advertising. Billions of dollars. Sponsors control what you see on television, what you see in advertising. Sponsors support magazines. Sponsors support TV and radio programming, and these programs can only limit themselves so much without hurting themselves, because without advertising, there is no mainstream media. There is no Time magazine or Newsweek or Life magazines. Wow, am I dating myself? Or whatever kind of magazines or periodicals or newspapers that you choose to use. It's all about dollars. It's all about dollars. And this is why you see this type of behavior going on TV and in our magazines. And it's just sad. And to some extent, it involves public denial. And again, the public denial comes from the subtle acceptance of things that we previously found unacceptable. We have people, why isn't there the public outrage that you would expect? And that's because people are living in some sort of utopian fantasy. Some people choose to live in that utopian fantasy. Nothing is really important, and such tolerance of immorality, when you think about it, if you know history, led to the downfall of the Roman and Greek empires, where they accepted what we would consider immoral behavior as normal. And so with that, I say that there is really nothing new under the sun. It's the same thing where we are gradually walking down a path that if we don't catch ourselves, it's going to be irrecoverable. We're going to be at a point where we're not able to go back and close Pandora's box, because Pandora's box is open. And once open and the evils come out, they're hard to put back in the box.
You're absolutely right about that, sir. I apologize for bleeping out like that. My computer died. And think about that. I kept saying at the beginning how shook I was about this story, right? I took my power cord out and didn't plug it up and sat it behind my computer. That's why my computer died. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. No, I've done the same thing. I've done the same thing. I was just thinking to myself, I guess the topic is too hot even for your computer. Uh, um,
Right.
but yeah, it's you know, one of the things I was just saying is that uh, we don't need government intervention if people had the wherewithal to boycott the products, but they
Okay.
won't. But they won't because you talked about people. You saw people burning Balenciaga products and how much they cost. Well,
Uh-huh.
those people have enough money to go on a video or to take that and burn it and go whoopee, and you go, wow, look at that, and then they're going
Yeah.
to go right out and buy something else. Uh, I can't afford to burn a $3,000 pocketbook or a pair of shoes.
Yeah.
Some people can afford to do that, but the idea is not to burn what you previously had, is to stop buying what you're going to buy. And
Right.
so, and years ago, back in the 60s, uh, uh, Black people and those involved in the civil rights struggle couldn't depend on government intervention for certain products.
Right.
So we boycotted those products. And that's how change. And I could think about Pepsi Cola for one. In my home city, Tasty Cake, which is huge in Philadelphia, it took boycotts to change their policy.
Okay.
One of the makers of parts for cars, that's headquartered in Philadelphia, people boycotted the product and boycotted and demonstrated around that business to the point where they elected to hire Black executives in those places, where
Right.
before that was prohibited. So the public has a lot of power, but it's sad that we choose not to use that power in a positive way.
Right.
Um,
So let me ask you about the naysayers pertaining to this particular campaign, because there are people um, who are saying that we're making a big deal out of this Balenciaga thing. Uh, why would this big company put all of this sexual innuendo and demonic innuendo in these campaign when they're trying to sell products? And they're just really acting like it's much ado about nothing. What do you say to those people?
well, it goes back to something I said a little bit earlier. You influence people by changing their subconscious.
Right.
And the another one example I can use, and I hope I don't go too deep in the weeds here, but years ago, particularly at movie theaters and at drive-in theaters, they used what they called subliminal advertising, which
Okay.
is, and what that is that you're watching a movie, you only see the movie, but in one scene, maybe they have one little clip that you don't see consciously of a soda,
Uh-huh.
and another clip down the line will be a big box of popcorn. And they do these, it's only one clip, so it goes by in many seconds. But what happens is that your subconscious picks it up, and all of a sudden you get thirsty, but you want some popcorn and you want some soda. And that has been outlawed by the government. That is no longer permitted. So again, it's because you change people's conscious minds by affecting their subliminal mind. So their subconscious mind. Same thing here. People are gradually led down this path to the point where they're not upset. And I use the phrase they're living in utopian fantasy where, it's no big thing. It's no big thing.
Yeah.
And you put enough no big things, and you get way over here, way down in the pit,
Yeah.
and now you can't climb out
Yeah.
because those little things really became a big thing, and it's
Right.
hard to extricate yourself and go back. So,
Correct.
yes, it's a very big thing. I have seen it up close. I've seen much too much child abuse,
Yeah.
sexual abuse up close. and it's very unsettling, and it's a shame, but the public really needs to have more programming such as yours to really stimulate their consciousness and of the seriousness of this type of advertising, this type of exploitation of our children.
Correct. You're absolutely correct. I couldn't agree more. And I would think that they would have at least, Balenciaga would have at least followed through on what the president said they were going to do as far as donating money to organizations that protect children, which would be a good start. But to me, you can't be donating money to an organization that protects children, then in the shadows, you back there doing things that hurt children.
Well, the one thing about that is these apologies, they're not really written by the executives. They're written by their public relations department.
Right. Yeah, right.
And the purpose is, number one, to calm the waters a little bit, but also to prevent further legal action,
Right.
and also to say something that's palatable for the people who continue to buy their product. So that's who it's written for. These executives hire people. And the one thing that we didn't really touch on, but was how did this stuff get out? How is it that a company that's supposed to be reputable let this out? They want to say it's a mistake. Right. It's not a mistake. They have quality control people all up and down the line.
Yes. That's the main point. I'm so glad you said that. That's the main point I want people to understand, because a lot of the things on that list that I gave you about a lot of the symbolism they put in there, people just making excuses like, oh, that's just this, oh, that's just that. Why would they do that? And I just don't understand how you can be so blind or ignorant to the fact that this thing happens, and it happens at every level of society, and because they're a big company, they just wouldn't do this. But I want to this next topic is very very interesting to me, and it was something I had never really heard of. So I want to know, you being a former law enforcement, had you heard of this prior to our interaction about this story? And that's the minor attracted persons movement. Have you ever heard of that, and do you know anything about it?
I've heard it used in terms that we can more easily understand, which is pedophiles. I'm sorry. We put these big words on it, abbreviated MAP, MAP.
Yeah.
These are just people who go after children.
According to this movement, it's a movement starting over in Great Britain, where pedophiles, like you say, they're using mainstream websites such as YouTube, Twitter, Instagram to rebrand pedophilia as a harmless sexual preference. They're saying that being attracted to children is as natural as a man being attracted to a man, a woman being attracted to a woman, and it's basically harmless, and that they've been shunned from society for so long, and they need to be able to have a voice and be able to live their life in a normal way. And so they're on the social media sites I just mentioned to you, and they're hashtagging things like maps are amazing, repost if you think maps should be able to date minors, minor attraction is natural. Like, there's a whole movement, and they're targeting these areas where they know our children are, Twitter, YouTube, but there are even some schools that tell students to go to use YouTube for research and things of that nature. But it's up to parents to be diligent and make sure they know, or they have the parental control set, so that children don't have access to this stuff. Because there are people, they're out there and they're actively pushing for this to be a thing. So how do you think that should be handled as a society?
Well, I think the one thing that we can't be blind to is that some of these minor attracted persons sit on executive boards of big corporations like Balenciaga.
Yeah, yeah. You're absolutely
You can't be blind to that. Some of these minor attracted persons are preachers in churches.
Yep. Teachers at schools, police officers.
Teachers in schools, police officers. Yep. The one example that I use here, and I'm going to offend some people, but you had a preacher of a major metropolitan church,
yes,
who was involved in sexual contact with young boys.
Yes.
And rather than the congregation and abandoning the church, nothing really happened. The preacher, really, the church paid off these young boys with substantial amount of money to end any type of criminal prosecution. And this guy is, well, he's dead now, but he was deified.
Right.
He was still held up to high esteem when he died.
Right.
And you know, this is the society. Society happens because of our own interactions and our own acceptance of norms of behavior. And when you accept this from someone who's supposed to be a trusted member of the community,
right,
that says a lot about you. This is a lot about you. And then who do our children go to? Do they go to people at this church and say, you know, I've been sexually abused by my school teacher. Can you do something for me? No, you can't, because you've already accepted that. So it's sad. And sometimes we don't need to look at the Balenciagas of the world. We need to look at ourselves.
Yes, we do. And that's one of the things that's so frustrating to me about how the furor has died down. Like, we have to stay impassioned about the negative things that are impacting our children. I haven't been able to stop thinking about this whole campaign since I learned about it the first week in December. And maybe it's because there's a personal component for me. But I would like to think, even if I didn't have that personal component, that as a human being, when I know and see children being harmed, that should make us want to step up to the plate and protect our children.
Well, let me just bring up one incident that because we got into this subject, it brought it back. I try to put this at the back of my mind, but it's actually written in my autobiography.
Okay.
There was an incident I was involved in where children who were about 7 and 8 years old called the police because their father was beating the daughter and has thrown his 13-year-old sister down the steps.
Wow.
So the police came and the father says, "Oh no, we were just having a little bit of an issue, you know," and she accidentally fell on the steps. So about 45 minutes later, the call comes out again. This 8-year-old boy calls 911, and the police come back, except this time a police woman came.
Okay.
Took the 13-year-old girl away from everybody else.
Right.
And talked to her. Found out that the father had been priming her. I don't want to get into too much detail. Over a long period of time. Then on this particular day, when the mother was at work, was a Friday night, he decides he wanted to take it further. She resisted. This is a 13-year-old child.
Yeah.
She resisted. And in her resisting, he began to fight with her. And this involved throwing her down a flight of stairs, actually kicking her. And so we at that time arrested the father, and there's a procedure that you have to go through. And I was responsible for taking this young girl to a hospital to be examined by medical personnel.
Mm.
Shortly after getting there, there were police from the sex crimes unit, a black female and a white male. And I knew the black female. And they looked at their watches and said, you know, we're supposed to get off at 1 o'clock.
What?
And it was about 12 o'clock. It was almost 12. And, well, and their headquarters is way on the other side of town. So the guy says, and I won't use the terms that he used, but he said, that girl is lying. He hadn't even talked to her. That girl is lying. And I said, she's not lying. Oh, she's lying. Well, let's go talk to her. So when I got back the next day, I'm looking for them names to be in the arrest book. They had intimidated this 13-year-old girl not to testify against her father. So
the police,
this is the fact. And this is why I wrote about it in my book, because I have a chapter that's almost dedicated to child abuse. And what happens is you can't look at it as just that minor incident. I had to go back to the house a year later, which is a whole nother story, because I really jumped all over the parents. But what was the damage done to that child that she may be living with to this day?
Oh, yeah. Right.
Because who do I go to? I went to the police, and the police prevented me from being protected.
Right. Yeah.
So she goes
a horrible statement.
She goes back into that household and lived there. So now the father, and I don't know that this happened, the father comes after her again. But here is the damnable part of it, that the mother wasn't outraged by this. Because a year later, I go back to the house and they're all sitting in there. There was a disturbance in the house. But I jumped all over the mother. How could you stay here in this house with this man and these children after what this man did to your child?
Right.
And so these children, a lot of these children who are sexually abused and exploited, they're in a real dark place. And we need to think about that.
Yeah.
Because in some instances, they have no one to turn to. No
Correct.
one to turn to.
Correct.
I go back to that church, trusted preacher,
yep.
High esteemed in the community. This happens. And a lot of these children, and even in that incident, are mentally damaged to this day.
Yep. Most definitely.
They are.
Most
and
definitely.
So there's a trust factor. And what this leads to is these children may become sexual abusers themselves.
Yep.
They may, because of their maladjustment psychologically, they may engage in destructive behaviors, or worse yet, they are all candidates for suicide.
Yes. Yes. And I'm glad you said that, because the information I saw said that children who are sexually abused are 2 to 3 times more likely to attempt suicide or commit suicide because of the trauma that they suffer.
I think Dr. Wanzo would say die by suicide, but that's terminology. I'm sure Dr. Wanzo would appreciate that. So
right. And I'm really glad you started throwing out stats, because I'm gonna throw some out myself. It says 60% of child sexual abuse victims never tell. 30% of child sexual abuse victims are abused by family. 40% of child sexual abuse victims, 40% of child sexual abuse is committed by minors. That one kind of blew my mind. Because my situation was a minor. She was 14 and I was 6. But I didn't think that number was that high for children who commit this on other children. But for me, even when I think about that, if you're a child doing that to another child, like the 14-year-old girl in my situation, there had to be somebody doing that to her. You know what I mean? Like, this is not something that a child wakes up one day and say, this is something I'm going to do to another child. So that 40%, that really shook me when I read that number. 91% of the time, the crime is perpetrated by someone they know.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, some of the consequences of how it affects people who are sexually abused, physical consequences, physical injury. They can be injured internally from the assault itself, if it's that type of assault. They're at a greater risk later in life for having heart disease and cancer. Their mentals, most of them suffer depression or PTSD. You mentioned risky sexual behavior. They're at higher risk for substance abuse. And you mentioned the suicide. So, this thing it's not like it happens and it's just done with in that instance. Children are affected long term. It affects them well into adulthood. And one of the stats I saw, it said most victims of child sexual abuse, it takes anywhere from 21 to 35, 40 years for them to even be able to talk about it. Just to even be able to talk about it. So a lot of times people are going through things and suffering in silence because they don't, like you said, in the situation you gave, they thought they had somewhere they could go to be protected, police, and the police turned around and sent them right back to the lion's den, right? And so, yeah, it's very bad. Now, this next stat is truly disturbing. It says there are 500,000 registered sex offenders in the United States. 80 to 100,000 of them are missing. Now, as a former criminal justice person, how does that happen? How have you lost 100,000 pedophiles or sex offenders?
Well, the people who monitor the sex offenders are also the people who monitor people committing other crimes. And it depends on, well, first, it's a numbers game. It's a numbers game. The numbers that you talk about are horrendous. So how do you create or pay for a force, a police force or security force, to closely monitor these people?
Right.
The public doesn't want to do that. I'm telling you, they give lip service to it. They give lip service to it. I'm sorry, but we've cut staffs on police departments all across the country. We've cut staff on parole boards all across the country.
Yeah.
We've cut staff on correction facilities all across the country. So these are the checks and balances that we have in place for these people. And when you begin to cut staff, it's the same as we have what you call caseloads.
Mm-hmm.
So if you, and I was involved in the welfare industry many years ago. And so you may have a caseworker who has a workload of 70 to 80 people that you're supposed to monitor. You have parole board people who may be monitoring not 10 or 11 people, they may be monitoring 70 or 80 people.
Right.
That's monumental.
Yeah.
And it's in this day of technology, it's easy to change your identity, to not only change your identity, but to change your identity first, move, and then you become untraceable. You get a fake social security number, where you get the social security number of a little child, and you become invisible.
Right.
That's the alarming part of this. That's the alarming. So,
well, here's another alarming part too, attached to these 100,000 missing pedophiles. It says that a typical pedophile will commit 100 to 300 sexual crimes in his or her lifetime.
Yeah.
100 to 300 sexual crimes. And then I think about Larry Nassar. Larry Nassar
Oh my goodness. Yes.
265 girls, sometimes in front of their parents.
Yep.
With their parents in the room.
I think you need to explain who he is. He is.
Larry Nassar was the official trainer
right.
for the U.S. Olympic team.
Mm-hmm. The gymnasts.
The all of the gymnasts, right? Simone Biles and big names like that.
Mm-hmm.
And because he was the main trainer, he had access to these girls that most people wouldn't have. And he manipulated them and groomed them to the point where he was able to ruin the lives of 265 girls. How does that happen? How does one man, and if you look at this man, I looked at this picture yesterday. I mean, the man don't look like a sack of nothing. Okay, he don't look like he'll hurt a flea. He don't look like he'll bust a grape in a fruit. But he had intention and he had access. And I have to say he had protection to a certain degree.
Exactly.
Because you can't tell me nobody in that organization knew that this man wasn't doing something.
I'll take you one better. One better. Ohio State University. Male athletes being sexually abused, and there was a big cover up. And who do you think facilitated the cover up?
The athletic department?
Well, the athletic department, yes, but also Congressman Jim Jordan, who we also know is a high-profile Trump supporter. This is fact.
Yeah.
And that investigation totally has been suppressed. And that's how this stuff continues. Nothing happens in a vacuum.
Yes.
Yes, as you said, Larry Nassar, the people at Ohio State University, they have facilitators and they also have protectors along the way. And so that's how this stuff continues. And one thing that you have to remember, you say, well, how come the people don't talk about it? Okay, you're a guy. I'm going to use a guy because we can identify with being a guy.
Right.
And you go to your doctor for whatever to be checked up, and your doctor begins to fondle you.
Right, right.
And you know that this is what's going on. How do you report that? Because if you report it, what's going to be said is either you're lying or you facilitated it. This is something that you wanted. And then how do you fight that?
Right.
How do you fight that? So, we have trauma, we have shame.
Yep.
And this is why you have children who were abused by priests not reporting it until they're in their 30s.
Yep.
40s and 50s, because the shame is difficult to overcome.
Oh yeah, most definitely.
The shame. And so you have people who live with the trauma, and I have a feeling that I understand that you understand that, because you can epitomize, and I don't want to get too deep into this. You can epitomize with something that you have either real or tacit knowledge of, because what that does is it awaken things in here.
Right. Oh yeah.
And so we suffer. We suffer all over again. When Jane Doe begins to talk about her sexual abuse experiences and how that happened, we start thinking in our head, man, I think that happened to me too.
Right. Yeah.
Or that happened to somebody that's close to me. That's what happens. And no, we cannot stand for associations that begin to normalize pedophilia, that type of behavior.
Correct. Absolutely correct. Which is why I feel like there should be more numbers still talking about this incident, because it wasn't just Balenciaga. Tampax had a scandal.
Oh, yes.
Tampax had a scandal. I think it was a week before the Balenciaga scandal, and their scandal involved they co-opted, I guess, this meme or this saying that had been going around on social media. And when they co-opted it, what it said was, "You are in their DM, but we are inside of them. We are
Right.
not the same." Right? And again, like you said, with the people that go over this stuff with a fine-tooth comb, their teams that check this stuff. When I first read that statement, I said, "Oh my God, that's not going to go over well with women." Right? That was the first thing I said. So how do you have people that are in positions that's supposed to make sure nothing controversial goes out or happens, still putting this stuff out? Because now you're sexualizing women at a specifically sensitive time of the month for them. But as it was pointed out when I was researching it, you're also sexualizing young girls and teens, because there are young
Right.
girls and teens that use your product.
Right.
So you can't tell me that was a mistake. And so these companies are pushing, like you said earlier, they're pushing the envelope, they're pushing the boundaries of what's acceptable and what they can get away with, or I guess what they're trying to make acceptable. And we're getting close to, we got like 4 minutes left. Again, I apologize to everybody listening for the little hiccup earlier when my power went out on my computer. But I want to ask you this, Mr. Carter, before we go. Do pedophiles retire?
I think by the statements that you just made, the answer would be a resounding no. In fact, if you pay attention to news media and prosecutors, that the recidivism among pedophiles is extremely high. In fact, it's so high that they're almost put on lifetime monitoring even after they're released from incarceration, if they are incarcerated. And that's why we have pedophile registries. Because and that stays with you for life. Because of the high recidivism rate.
So let me ask you this about the recidivism. If the recidivism rate is so high, and that means the likelihood to offend again, we like to teach here on Conversations in Education. Recidivism means the likelihood to repeat the offense again. If we know that that is high for pedophiles, why do we give such light sentences? Because I read some of these stories, and it's a lot, but a lot of times they're getting 1 to 3 years in prison, or sometimes if it's a first offense, they might get probation for a year or something. No, I feel like this is one of those offenses. If you harm a child, which is the most vulnerable segment of our population, if you harm a child, they need to throw the book at you.
Yeah, I agree.
So why are the sentences, guys, not higher for something like that? But you, Black community, for a rock of crack, you get 20 years. But somebody can violate a child, harm a child, ruin this child for the rest of their life, and they get less than 5 years, or in the worst case scenario, probation.
Well, we as a society accept that. And that's what this program is about right now, is to encourage people not to accept. And we need more of this type of programming. And I wish to high heaven that this program in particular would go viral. I really wish that it would.
I do too, sir. And I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to discuss this very important issue with me, especially being a former police officer. I know you've seen some things that nobody else should bear witness to. So I appreciate that. Thank you to the listeners for tuning in today. I'm going to give some things you can do if you feel like your child has ever been sexually assaulted. But before that, here are some things you can do if you've ever felt like committing suicide. We've had a couple of high profiles of suicides in the news lately. I believe the young man's name was Twitch from the DJ Twitch from the Ellen show. He took his own life over the holiday season last week or a couple of days ago. One of the founders of Dave and Buster, the Buster from Dave and Buster, I believe it was, he committed suicide. And so people are committing suicide and taking their lives every day for whatever reason. So if you feel like, you're having those thoughts and you feel like you need some help, here are some things you can do. The most important thing to do in a suicidal crisis is to either call an emergency hotline, go to an emergency facility, whether that be a hospital or a mental health agency you trust, or call 911. You can also reach out to a mental health professional. Find ways to empower yourself, recognize an emergency, or you or someone else in immediate harm. Know where to go. The hospital, mental health agency, just seek support in whatever way possible. Even friends. I have friends, me personally, I wouldn't feel right going to a mental place or some other outside place, but I'm very comfortable talking to my friends. I have at least 5 to 7 friends I know I could go and talk to if I was feeling like that. So find you somebody you can trust and talk to, and make sure you talk about some of the things that you're going through, because you're not alone. People are dealing with these things every day. So just make sure you get the help that you're looking for. Some of the things to do if your child, or if you suspect your child has been sexually abused. The first thing it says, which you mentioned earlier, Mr. Carter, is it says to believe your child. And when I first read that, I was kind of amazed that was the first thing they tell you to do. Like you have to tell people to believe their children. But it makes me think about this. I met an escort one time. She was 21 years old. And I asked her how long she had been escorting. And she said for 10 years. She told me she had been escorting for 10 years at 21. And I said, how did that happen? She said her mother's boyfriend sexually assaulted her. She told her mother didn't believe her. Her mother kicked her out. Her mother took her to a hotel, paid for a room for 6 months, dropped her daughter off. That lady said she'd never seen her mom again. Okay? That left a lasting impression on me. And I know that's a personal story I know. And I have too many personal stories that I know of people who have similar or worse stories than that. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, there has to be a greater communication among parents in their children. One of the worst things in the Black community to me is that saying that a child should be seen and not heard. That's one of the worst philosophies of life, I guess, you can live by, because it puts a child in a situation where if anything happens to them, they don't have a voice. They don't feel like they can come and talk to anybody about anything. You know what I mean? So I think that's one of the things people always talk about, generational curses. That's a generational curse that we need to break. We need to treat our children like they are valued little representations of us, because that's really what they are. So nevertheless, make sure you tell your child you believe them. Reassure your child that it wasn't their fault and that you'll keep them safe. Afterwards, call the police. This is not something you can handle without professional help. Don't ask your child a lot of questions. Just let them talk. This part I kind of question. It says, don't say bad things about the abuser. Your child may have conflicted feelings about them and doesn't need you threatening them or saying bad things about them. I don't necessarily agree with that. Let me ask you this real quick, Dr. Carter, and I know, Penny, we got to go. I'm wrapping up. What age do you think you should talk to children about sexual abuse and the potential that there are people out there that would do evil things like this to them?
I think as soon as they can understand yes and no,
yes, sir,
how to go to the bathroom, those type of things, become aware of their own bodies. So children are smarter than we give them credit for. Yes. And I think you can start this conversation in little small doses from the age of 2 or 3, where you start talking about bad touch, good touch, and who, and and this is bad and this is good. You can start like 2 or 3 years old.
Yes.
And then as they grow older, you become more sophisticated in your conversation with them. But the building blocks start very, very young.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And I'm glad you gave that age of 2 or 3. I started with my son at 3 because my son was a little more advanced for his age level.
Mm-hmm.
And so I sat him down at 3. Do you know your private areas? He said yes. And we went through that. And I told him, I said, don't you ever let anybody touch you there that makes you feel uncomfortable or causes you pain. I said, I don't care if it's daddy, mommy, granddaddy, grandma, auntie, uncle, cousin, sister, teacher, I don't care who it is. Right? So I gave him that whole spiel. And then I looked him in his eyes. I said, if anybody ever does anything to you, because, you know, a lot of these pedophiles, they like to threaten children, like threaten
Mm-hmm.
them or threaten they're going to kill their parents. I looked him in his eyes. I said, if anybody does anything, you come and tell daddy and daddy will kill them. I told him just like that. I said, because your child needs to know that you will do anything to protect them.
Right. Right.
And I told my son that. I said, do you understand me? He shook his head. Yeah. I said, no. I grabbed him by his shirt. No. Do you understand me? He said, yes, sir. I said, okay, go play. And I reinforced that as he got older.
Correct.
You have to know your child and you have to know, you know, the age, but don't act like, my thing is we act like as a community that these things aren't happening, or we treat them as isolated incidents, and it's happening on an epidemic scale.
Yep.
Okay. One of the last things I want to mention is two United States senators have introduced bipartisan legislation in an effort to ensure that survivors of childhood sexual abuse may seek justice through civil lawsuits without being barred by statutes of limitations. Okay. Federal Civil Remedy Statute Code blank blank, also known as the Eliminating Limits to Justice for Child Sex Abuse Victims Act of 2022, was proposed by Tennessee Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn and Illinois Democrat Senator Dick Durbin. Under the proposed bill, survivors of over a dozen childhood sex crimes would be eligible to seek damages through civil lawsuits in federal court, regardless of how long ago an offense has occurred. I think that's absolutely wonderful because it never made sense for me, to have statutes of limitations on something as serious as child sexual abuse.
Correct.
So I'm glad to know that that is something, and that went into public law November 16th, 2022. So research that, and if you are a survivor and you think that you can gain some type of recourse and healing, especially healing is important from these situations, research Eliminating Limits to Justice for Child Sex Abuse Victims Act of 2022. Okay, with that, I want to thank my guest again, Mr. Norman Carter. One more thing before we go. Penny knows I can't get out of here without doing my Scholar of the Week. Today's Scholar of the Week goes to, goes to 17-year-old Isaiah Bowden. Isaiah Bowden is a 17-year-old from North Carolina, I believe it was Raleigh. She jumped out of a moving lift ride because she felt like she was about to be a victim of childhood abduction, right? She's in the Uber ride, grown man. As soon as she gets in, he starts complimenting her. He starts telling her things like, I know the little boys be all over you. And he even says, I would date you myself if you were a little older. So that makes her spidey sense and her antenna go up, which we have to teach our children to trust. And then she said the man took a little spray bottle. He starts spraying something, this mist in the car while he's letting up the window. So he's spraying whatever this is and letting up the window. And the girl said she started to feel like she was drugged and getting lightheaded. So she said the only thing she could think to do was jump out of this moving car. So she opened the door and she jumped out of the car. And if you find the video, she got bruises and marks all on her face. but she basically potentially saved herself from being abducted and sexually assaulted or worse, right? And so I want to commend Isaiah Bowden for recognizing, having the awareness to know that something is not right in this situation, and then doing whatever it took to get out of that situation. Because
Right.
she'd have blacked out in that car, there's no telling what would end up happening to this young lady.
Correct.
So Isaiah Bowden, you are my scholar of the week for just being aware and being smart and saving your own life. With that, I'm gonna give these this National Sexual Assault Hotline one more time. It's 1-800-656-4673, 1-800-656-4673, or you can text 988, and that is the Suicide Prevention and Crisis Lifeline. Child sexual exploitation and abuse is rampant throughout the United States and the world. And people always complain about, I've heard people that don't believe in God or that question God sometimes, like if God was real, he wouldn't let this happen. He wouldn't let children get hurt. He wouldn't let children get killed. And he wouldn't this, he wouldn't that. Well, God put us here to be the stewards of this planet. And God put us here to stand up and correct anything that we feel is wrong. And so for me, this show was important. And it's the first step of me becoming an advocate and speaking out against childhood sexual abuse. So talk to your friends, talk to people close to you. Let them know. Can I ask you a personal question? Has this ever happened to you? You'd be surprised the number of people that you know that this has happened to, and they just keep it on the side. I just found out a friend I've known for 30 years had this happen to him when I talked to her about this very same show. So just be aware, talk about it. Don't just let this stuff die down. Talk with your friends, talk with your churches, talk with your whatever groups that you're in. We need to talk about what we can do to protect our children. This is an epidemic that is happening every day. With that being said, thank you for tuning in to Conversations in Education. Thank you to my guest, Mr. Norman Carter, host of Issues and Answers, second and fourth Mondays, 4 p.m.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you for being a supporter of WCEG Network. Thank you to my producers, Penny and Vivian. I appreciate y'all. And I look forward to growing even more in 2023. Happy New Year, everyone. Peace and love. Protect your children. Peace.